Hello and welcome back. Okay, so for this Photoshop for Beginners tutorial, we're going to talk about saving files, file types, and exporting your files, which is another option versus saving, but I would still save my file even if I export, and I'll explain what that's all about in just a second. So what I recommend doing is getting into the habit of saving your file every couple of minutes or anytime you add a new layer or do a major type of edit or an addition to your creative artwork, whether it's a photograph or a graphic design project. I save my files probably between 1 to 2 minutes as I'm working to ensure that I don't lose any of the work that I'm adding to that file, because if I work on a file for 10, 15 minutes, half an hour, or even an hour, and the power goes out, well, I have to start all over because I didn't save the file. Now, that being said, software is a lot more intelligent than it was when I started using Photoshop back in 1990, and there are autosave features built into Photoshop and other programs for that matter, but I still wouldn't rely on those autosave options, because what if there's a bug in the software and it's not actually saving the file, and you don't find out that it's not saving the file until it's too late? So I would just recommend getting into the habit of saving every couple of minutes or after you do a major edit by adding a new layer or new graphic or whatever it is, and it's real easy to do. Now, the slowest way to do it is to go up to File and select Save. What I prefer doing and what I recommend is getting into the habit of using the keyboard shortcut, which is right here, Command or Control and the letter S. So I just keep my left hand close to that keyboard shortcut. It's on the left hand side of the keyboard. So anytime I make a change to my document, I'll save it with this keyboard shortcut, and I don't even have to look at the keyboard anymore because I know exactly where it is. I've trained my hand to know that those two keystrokes are exactly where they should be when I place my left hand on the keyboard, and it's just habit now. It's going to take a little time to get used to doing it, and over a period of time you should be able to do it as well, and it will just become habit. You won't even realize you're doing it as you do it more and more. Now, when you click on Save, you are presented with this window here. You can give your file a name if you didn't give it a name when you created the new document, or maybe it's a photograph, you haven't given it a name yet. So go ahead, add a name up here. And then down here, we have to decide on the file type. Now, by default, it's going to select Photoshop for you, especially when you have additional layers. And a Photoshop file is what is known as PSD. So a PSD file is a raw format type of file that will keep all of your layers intact. Now, we're not going to go over all of these different file formats. I'm going to share with you the 3 most common types of file formats that you're going to use. And then if you want to explore these other file formats, you can do that. But as photographers or as a graphic designer, PSD is probably the one that you're going to use most often. If you're going to send the file out to the internet on your website, Facebook, or whatever the case may be, you're not going to send out a PSD file. You're going to use what is known as a JPEG file. So a JPEG file is lossy compression. So in other words, the file is compressed from the original. It flattens all the layers, so you don't have access to all the layers if you open up that file again. But you have to use a JPEG file for the internet. There's other file formats that you can use online as well, but that's the one I use 99.9% of the time is JPEG or PNG. So a PNG file is lossless. It's going to keep a higher amount of the information of that file versus JPEG, but more importantly, I will use a PNG file when there's transparency in the document itself. So let me show you what that looks like. So right now I have a background layer that I unlocked, and if I click and drag that over to the left, right, or wherever, we are left with a section that has no pixels. So this is transparency. So if you want to be able to show that transparency or show online that there's no information here, then you have to use a PNG file. And we will be working with PNG files throughout this premium course so that you know how to use them and when and why you would want to use PNG over JPEG files. So the first time you save that file, you're going to go through the screen, name it, and then select your format. So once you save that file for the first time, you no longer need to go through that screen. You can use the keyboard shortcut Command or Control and the letter S. Now, if you want to save that file as a separate copy of that original file, you can use Save As to get back to the screen, and then you can name that file differently from the original. And this way you can have different versions of your edit saved versus doing them all within one master file. Now, another thing you may want to consider before you save that file as a JPEG file for internet use, I would recommend exporting the file as a JPEG versus saving it as a JPEG, and here's why. If we go up to File and select Export, we see a bunch of options. Up here at the top, we can do a quick export as PNG, so we can bypass that window over here. With this window, it's just going to give us PNG for the file type, and then you just name it, and there's no option to select any other format. So if you want a PNG file, I would go that route. Now, the other option I want to mention is Save for Web. So this will condense or compress your JPEG file in a way so that you can create a smaller file for use online. Because the larger the file, the longer it's going to take for somebody to download that image on their browser to view it. Now, with today's internet speeds, it's not as big of a problem as it was back in 1999 when my top speed available was 56.6 kilobytes per second, which is extremely slow. So nowadays it's about 50 times faster than that, but we still want to create a file size as small as possible without losing a lot of the quality of the original file. So in the Save for Web dialog box, we have a lot of options to optimize that file for internet use and to create a smaller file. So by default, the quality is set to 60. So the lower the quality setting, the lower quality of your image. But at the same time, the smaller the file. So you want to find a happy medium between high quality and low file size. And what Photoshop is going to do is it's going to take this information to optimize that file for the best quality with the smallest file size, and it's going to give you a preview of what that file looks like based on that quality setting. So if you're not happy with the way it looks here, then you can increase the quality, and I usually do between 80 to 100. 100 is the least amount of compression, but it's still being compressed, but it is the highest quality setting for JPEG files. So if you find something that you like at 80, there's no reason to do it at 100, and you'll notice when you increase the quality, the file size increases. Now we can't see that right now because it's a blank document. But if I open up an image, let's go back to export. So right now the file size is about 4.5 megabytes at the maximum, which is 100. But if I drop this down to 80, the file size drops to around 3 megabytes. Now visually, I didn't see any change in the quality of the preview of the image, so I know that 80 quality is going to give me a lower size file with the same visual quality. Now if I drop this down to 60, again, I'm not seeing any difference, but the file is even smaller than it was before. And then as I go lower and lower, that quality of the image gets much worse, and now I can see some pixelization in the image, but the file size is 345K, so it's about 15 times lower in size than at 100 for the quality. So to sum it up, exporting in this manner will allow you to create a high quality image at a lower file size, which will allow people to download that image much faster versus using the original high-res file. And this is important if you're a professional photographer, because if you're putting these images online in your gallery, your prospects are most likely not going to want to wait around for your images to slowly load on their mobile device. Because if somebody's looking at your gallery on their smartphone or their tablet, it's going to be a little bit slower versus a desktop. So for this particular file at this size, it would take 884 seconds at this speed. Now that's not really a fair comparison for what we have nowadays for internet speeds. If I change this to 2 megabytes per second, it's going to take 25 seconds for this image to download and be viewable. So that's why it's important to get that size file down even more. And now I've changed it to 5 seconds versus 25 seconds. Now there's a lot of other information here that can help you lower the size of your file, and one of them would be the image size itself. Now if I'm posting this on my website or even Facebook, and I know the maximum width for that particular website, then that's the maximum width that I'm going to use for the file that I'm exporting. So if my website blog is, let's say, 1000 pixels wide, there's no reason to go any higher than 1000 pixels. And once I do that, it drops down the size of that file from 25 seconds down to 2 seconds. So that's a huge difference in file size. Okay, so that's how you use the Save for Web option when you select Export versus Saving. Okay, so that's it for saving and file types. In the next tutorial, we're going to take a look at bit depth and how it affects your images in Photoshop and which bit depths you should be using for your images.